What if I asked you, what is the most important thing in woodworking? You might say the tools, because you need to learn how to use them, have good tools to build good projects. But what if I told you there was something more important, and it's in the name? Woodworking. That's right, wood, the properties of wood, the basics of a board, if you will. I'm fairly new to woodworking, and I got a small little shop. I'm just trying to grow my knowledge base and my skill set. And along the way, I'm just going to share that information with you guys, and hopefully you can grow from it as well. So to find out how that piece of wood in your shop started as a tree, we got to start from the beginning. First, we're going to talk about the anatomy of a tree. Thanks to a friend of mine who provided me with this small piece of trunk, we are going to be able to show you guys a couple of things. So on the outside here, we have the bark layer, which is the protective tissue of the tree. And then on the inside of that, we have the phloem or blast layer, which is the living tissue underneath the bark. Then there's this yellow ring that goes all the way around. This is the cambium layer, which is where wood and bark are formed. This is where they come from. So they're growing from that layer. During the process of cutting these pieces of trunk down to make final boards, these three layers are completely removed. We do not use them. Then we have the bullseye, the center of the wood, which is the pith. This generally is removed as well. However, if you look at your 2x4s at Home Depot, you probably will see this. And that's why they're crooked. Maybe, most likely, right? Because it's unstable wood. So usually it's removed as well. So that leaves us with the two other layers. We have the heartwood, which is the darker rings in the center here. And then we have the sapwood, which is the lighter ring on the outside. The sapwood is called sapwood because when you cut it, it's living. So you see all the sap leak out of it. It's pretty interesting. And the heartwood is a dead part of the tree. Doesn't decay. It's like a structural integrity. It's like the beams of a building, right? That's the heartwood. So when a tree is young and it's, you can flex it, it's made out of sapwood. Right? It hasn't grown its heartwood really yet. So as you get more heartwood, the tree is usually bigger and they're a lot harder to move. Heartwood is more preferred for that reason, right? Because it's more stable. It doesn't get affected with humidity as much as sapwood. So that's why we prefer heartwood over sapwood, but you will get both and you can use both for your projects. So when a log is cut down, you can get three types of boards. You can get plain sawn, rift sawn, and quarter sawn. The difference between these three types of board is the grain pattern. The end grain is different on all three boards, and that affects the face grain, so the look of the board on the face, and it also affects their stability because the grain is different, right? So the stability is the way that it reacts to humidity. All right, so I drew a little example here so you guys can get a better idea of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about plain, rift, and quarter sawn. So up top is the plain sawn, rift sawn, quarter sawn. So that all depends on the grain angle. As you can see, I drew on one of the growth rings so you guys can get a better idea. So plain sawn has a less than 30-degree angle to its face. So this one looks like a frowny face. If you turn it upside down, it's a smiley face. These are the most common that you'll see at the stores. They're just easier to cut. However, they are prone to warping and cupping. Because when you pull it out, the grain lengths are different on each side, and with humidity, it'll cup or warp. However, you can ask for the other two cuts or find them yourselves. Rift is more stable than plain. However, you're going to pay for it, right? So it has a 45-degree angle, so between 60 and 30 degrees generally. And then you have a quarter, which is the most difficult and most expensive. It's between 60 and 90 degrees, so it's almost perpendicular to the face. I'm going to show you what each one of these would look like on the face of the board. So now that we understand what each cut could be, this is how they would cut them down. So we have the through and through here, which results in every type of board, right? Where they just cut across the whole log. It's the easiest one for them to do, right? So the log up top here would be our plain, then we would have our rift, and then we would have our quarter sawn, just like on the log that I just showed you. Right? So you get a multitude of different boards from this style. So then we have the plain sawn, which is working from the outside to the pith, where the pith is removed, but they do the same method as the through and through, and they come all the way down to the pith on all 4 sides. This results in no quarter sawn board, so just plain and rift sawn board. Then we have the quarter sawn. There's a preferred and a practical way to do it. The preferred method produces way more quarter sawn boards, right? Because you're cutting them and they're always going to be at 90 degrees. However, it is very difficult to do this type of milling. So that's why they mostly do the practical one over here, which is easier for them to do. However, the boards that end up at the end aren't necessarily quarter sawn, they're more rift sawn. So now that you know the type of cut you're looking for, now we can talk about the type of wood. So we can make a whole video on soft woods and hardwoods and all the types, but we'll just do a quick little rundown. Softwoods, usually yellowish or reddish in color. We have pine here, we have cedar, fir. These types of trees, they grow super fast, so they're super sustainable, and because of that, they're less expensive. However, because they are softwoods, they are prone to damages a little bit more, like this piece that you see here missing. Oh, how did that get there? Oh, anyways, now we're on a little bit of hardwood, right? Which is pretty much the exact opposite of the softwood. They're a little bit more rugged. However, they're not stronger than softwoods. Softwoods still have strength, right? So this is a little piece of cherry here. They are more expensive, harder to find because they have a nicer grain pattern and they generally have better features than softwoods. Most woodworkers would rather work with hardwoods over softwoods. However, as a beginner, there is nothing wrong with working with some softwoods. I've worked with it a bunch on my channel, so you can check out those videos. It's a great way to practice your skills and it doesn't break the bank. Next, we're going to talk about veneers. A veneer is a very thin sheet of wood, so you can get them in softwoods and hardwoods. So imagine we had a piece of maple. There's 2 methods that they would take a veneer from it. They would either slice it, where they slice really thin layers of the maple tree, or they would shave it, almost like put the maple tree into a pencil sharpener, right? And then slowly spin it and it would shave a layer off. This is a more affordable method, but the downside is that the pattern repeats itself. And that brings me on to sheet goods. And there's only one that I really want to talk about, and that's plywood, specifically veneer cord plywood. Veneer cord plywood is a bunch of veneers glued together into a sheet. When we take this sheet, the thickness of it depends on how many veneers we're gluing together. We need to pay attention when we're buying plywood. Something at a store labeled maple plywood or birch plywood might not be the entirety of the plywood itself. It might just be the outer layers, which is most likely the case. The inner layers are probably a softwood. Plywood made entirely of softwood is mostly used for construction. It's a mishmash of a bunch of softwoods with a bunch of voids, which makes the plywood unstable, and generally it's not really nice to look at. Now, a plywood made entirely of hardwood is usually all the same species and is a way more stable and nice looking piece of plywood to work with, and a common one people use is Baltic birch. Just as a quick note, if you're using a hardwood veneered plywood where the hardwood is just on the outside, you got to be really careful when sanding because you can sand right through that thin sheet. So now that we know what wood you're selecting for your project, we just got to make sure that we're picking the right piece. I don't want to dive too deeply on grading because hardwood and plywood are graded differently. However, lower the number, better the quality. Better the quality, lower the defects. Defects like cups, warps, and twists, they're harder to work with. Defects like knots, checks, and splits are a little bit easier to work with. So those will vary depending on the grade that you've chosen. Just make sure you pick the grade that's right for your project. And now that we selected our piece, we can go build something. As always, keep growing. And if you're looking for something to build, check these guys out. Subscribe. Subscribe.